The first and the most important thing is we are fascinated with progesterone as obstetricians, and then when we went into reproductive medicine, the level of progesterone we are measuring is not the same thing. There, we are measuring in nanograms, and when it comes to the progesterone in an IVF cycle, it is at the sub-nanogram level or more at the picogram levels. We seldom realize that. The second aspect, what we don't realize is the same progesterone has different names. Somebody says elevated luteinized progesterone. Somebody says premature progesterone rise. Somebody says premature luteinization. Somebody says suboptimal progesterone rise before the HCG. But ultimately, what we are saying is it's a progesterone rise that is happening, and we are trying to measure and find out its significance. Can I have the next slide? The next slide is I was wanted to project about Russell marker, because why I chose to choose the person Russell marker was he made a whole difference for the woman. He was the one who empowered women, and he made a huge difference in the 20th century by the discovery of the progesterone synthesis. Initially, he used to extract the progesterone from the bark, and subsequently, he synthesized progesterone. And in that way, the pill has come in, and he was kept as a pioneer by the American Chemical Society of USA as one of the pioneers who made a difference to the mankind. Why should we measure progesterone? For a long time, we thought we were measuring progesterone to identify the optimal time of window implantation. Then we started, or everybody in the world started. Next one.
And make a full screen. Yes, sir.
Why should we measure progesterone? The main aim of measuring progesterone is to look at the implantation window and identify when exactly the implantation window is closing. In fact, when you look at ERA test determines whether the window of implantation is getting narrow by possibly the premature progesterone rise. It does not reflect all possible genes. So next we go to the next slide. What are the current interpretations of progesterone value? Different people give different values. High progesterone value will advance the window of implantation. The second group is, they say instead of using high progesterone, use a parameter called progesterone to estrogen ratio on the day of HCG administration, which will reflect the amount of progesterone or estrogen that is producing in the oocytes, so that you're also counting the number of oocytes that are there in this value. And large studies have shown that the progesterone to estrogen ratio will affect IVF outcome subjected to the number of oocytes they get it. Next slide. One important thing is, are these recommendations or are these our perceptions drawn from the scientific data? Regarding the premature progesterone rise or subtle progesterone rise, at this moment, there are no current universally accepted recommendations. In this lecture, I'll be telling you why it is so and what data we should look at it when we are interpreting the information. Next slide. Then we have another set of data which says the publications which show on day 3 you have a serum progesterone value which is more than 1 nanogram, which will affect the clinical pregnancy rates. And that value worsens when the progesterone concentration reaches 1.5 nanograms. So this is about a day 3 embryo transfer, and this progesterone has been assessed prior to the HCG. Next slide. Then you have a day 5 progesterone. The value of cutoff levels for a day 5 embryo transfer is much higher than a day 3 progesterone value. A day 3 progesterone value will have an upper limit of 1.5 nanograms, whereas a day 5 progesterone embryo transfer value should be taken as a cutoff level of 1.7 nanograms. So the values you take that you obtain on the day of HCG and your embryo transfer date, the upper limits will vary if it is a day 3 embryo, if it is a day 5 embryo. This is one critical information we miss a lot of times. Next slide. When was the first thought there was a role of progesterone? It was thought as early as 1991 when Schoolcraft has shown some publications where he showed that there is a subtle rise of progesterone in the follicular phase prior to the administration of HCG, and then he found that it probably affects the implantation rate. So here I am on the left side of the screen, I'm showing a publication, low pregnancy rate with premature luteinization during pituitary suppression in 1991. Then you have another publication in Human Reproduction Update in 2008. And then at the end of 2021, we still do not have a clarity about the ideal mechanisms. That means all of us are struggling with the concept of progesterone for the last 20 years. The reason can be, the next slide. The reason can be, one is we have not done enough work on the progesterone. Second thing is the tools we are using in the progesterone to measure the progesterone are not uniform. Third thing is we are not controlling the variables that affect the progesterone production and then doing a multivariate analysis to find out what is the optimum level of progesterone that is needed to do an embryo transfer. Can we go to the next slide? I think, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Sir.
You're audible.
Then we go to the next slide, which is the most important slide in the whole lecture. Do we realize the difference between premature luteinization and premature progesterone rise? They're entirely different. A lot of times in India, when I see that people are thinking both are same. Premature luteinization and premature progesterone rise are two different entities. And in the next slide, I'll be showing you why there are two different entities. When it comes to the premature luteinization, in premature luteinization, there's a premature LH surge occurs when prior to the planned initiation of HCG trigger, which in turn luteinizes the granulosa and the theca cell and progressively increase the progesterone. This is different from, next slide, premature progesterone rise. Premature progesterone rise refers to a rise in serum progesterone levels on the day of HCG administration with a cutoff level which exists from 0.8 nanograms to 2 nanograms. Whereas in a premature luteinization, your progesterone is much higher than this value. So whenever we look at progesterone estimation in the follicular phase, we should question ourselves, are we looking at premature progesterone rise or premature luteinization? This is a main important concept, and because of lack of clarity of this concept, we are ending up with a lot of confusion. What are the next slide? What are the factors that influence serum progesterone levels on the day of HCG trigger in a stimulated IVF cycle? And what is the incidence that happens? A subtle progesterone rise happens in 5 to 30% of the cases, and this is different from premature luteinization. Next slide. Here you see a host of variables which affect premature progesterone rise, not premature luteinization. Older women have higher incidence of premature progesterone rise. That is because their antral follicle count is lower, their testosterone is lower. So because of that, we are giving a larger dose of stimulation. Similarly, in the body mass index is high, the amount of FSH you give also makes an important. Similarly, if your FSH is raised or your antral follicle counts are low or very high, again, you have an alteration or an abnormal premature progesterone rise. A woman with too many oocytes with high E2 levels also has a premature progesterone rise. Similarly, when you're using a large amount of FSH stimulation, not HMG stimulation or not FSH and LH stimulation, that means when you're using only the FSH and your dosage is larger, again you see the amount of premature progesterone rise is elevated. Similarly, when it comes to number of oocytes like estradiol elevated, higher amount of estrogen levels also reflect lot of times higher number of oocytes, which produces premature progesterone rise. The same concept applies to ovarian sensitivity. And people have found that when there's an excessive ovarian response or stimulus and you have a premature progesterone rise in the subsequent cycle, if you give metformin, the amount of premature progesterone rise decreases. There are a couple of articles which show women who had Dexona during their cycle had less amount of premature progesterone rise compared to the people who did not have Dexona. This is because the adrenal also plays a role in premature progesterone rise because of its CYP4 area. When you're using a luteal phase stimulation, if you use Clomid, there's a higher chance of premature progesterone rise. And when you're using a Letroz in the luteal phase part of the stimulation, in the DOCO stimulation or late luteal phase stimulation, in Letroz cycles, the premature progesterone rise is lesser. And last but not the least, if you don't stop your DHEA and continue to give your DHEA throughout your stimulation, you might also have a higher premature progesterone rise. Unless we realize all these variables, we are over-treating them and not understanding the physiological basis of a premature progesterone rise. Can we go to the next slide, please? In this slide, you're seeing serum progesterone elevation affects the cumulative live birth rate, but that difference starts coming beyond 1.5 to 1.9, and more so there's a consistent pattern at 2 nanograms. So the cutoff levels which I discussed in the day 3 and day 5 should be also taken into consideration, and then look at it to interpret this slide. This is a very good article from PLOS and quite interesting to read on the physiological basis of why premature progesterone rise occurs. Next slide. I would like to skip and go to the next slide, please. There is again an interesting study wherein on the x-axis you have the mean number of top quality embryos, and on the other axis you have the progesterone level, and as the progesterone level increases, your top quality embryo comes down. But this work is recently being disputed because they did a pre-implantation genetic diagnosis or pre-implantation genetic testing of embryos who had progesterone elevation, and when they transferred the euploid embryos in the subsequent cycle, they did not find any change in the implantation rate. So this slide of progesterone rise and embryo quality should be added with a caveat, whether they are speaking with age, whether they're speaking with BMI, whether they're speaking with low ovarian reserves or excessive response. Just saying progesterone affects embryo quality may not be an accurate statement. Next slide. There is another fascinating aspect. When you look at blastocyst transfer and progesterone estimation on the day of HCG, you find the implantation rates of a day 5 blastocyst is different and a day 6 blastocyst is different. That means a slow growing embryo and premature progesterone elevation, they can be a compounding factor for embryo endometrial asynchrony. But we seldom look at this data in this way. This is again a pointer of questioning that a faster cleaving embryo is a better embryo and it implants much better than a slightly slower cleaving embryo which goes into a blastocyst on day 6. So your rate of division of your cell of your embryo also makes a huge difference in your implantation rate. That's an important information I would like you to think and analyze the information. The next thing is, how do we interpret the data? Should we freeze all embryos? Should we freeze some embryos? Or we should use only the fresh embryos?
Switch off the phone. Switch off the phone.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. Like the literature, what does the literature say? Should we freeze all embryos? Should we not freeze any fresh, do only fresh cycles? Or should you do it depending on your clinic situation? This is what I'm going to discuss in the next slide. We have a lot of confusion about the premature progesterone rise, but we never realize and question the lab aspect about the progesterone estimation. In a beautiful review article in the Endocrinology and also in Fertility Sterility in 2008 and 2007, they suggested measurement of progesterone during follicular phase during commercial assay are unreliable, and they might explain the lack of association between progesterone elevation and the probability of pregnancy in different meta-analysis. This is again a key information for all of us to understand. Next slide. The other information which we seldom look at it is the duration of progesterone elevation. Most of the time, we're looking at a progesterone elevation on the day of HCG. Whether that progesterone elevation is of 2 days or 3 days or much longer makes a difference, which I'll be showing you in the next slide. Here in this slide, you have data showing the clinical pregnancy rate with the duration of progesterone elevation. There, they were speaking a value of more than 1 nanogram in this study. And when the duration was very, very short, the pregnancy rate was 41%. It was for 1 or 2 days, then the ongoing clinical pregnancy rate fell to 30%. When it was more than 3 days, it fell to 22%. So there is also an association between the duration of pre-HCG elevation of progesterone of more than 1 nanogram per ml and clinical pregnancy, which was calculated by a multivariate analysis. So apart from a single progesterone, there is more to it on the number of days of elevation of progesterone. Can we move to the next slide, please? What are the variables that affect a progesterone estimation? We have the patient, we have the assay, we have the stimulation protocol, we have the clinic. All these factors affect the progesterone elevation. I'll mention you one by one. In the patient, an older woman or an younger woman with excessive response can have a premature progesterone rise. Similarly, women with higher BMI, where you give a very large dosage of FSH only, but not with LH or not with HMG, again you see an elevated progesterone. When the basal level of FSH is elevated, or the antral follicles are too few or too many, you might have a premature progesterone elevation. These are the elevations that come from the patient point of view. And there is a beautiful editorial that was written in 2003 in the Journal of Assisted Reproduction and Genetics, where they're speaking about the CYP21 polymorphism, or in other words, the role of adrenal in progesterone rise, which will also explain when you have high E2 levels and too many oocytes, you have the adrenal component which might lead to excessive stimulation, and also an elevated testosterone which subsequently gets converted. So there is an adrenal component, but no additional research has been done in this area. Next slide. The role of progesterone in endometrial receptivity. When you read the literature about the ERA test is designed more for the genes that are associated with the progesterone upregulation. So that's the reason ERA test tells us the window of implantation, and when the more genes are upregulated, it might say your window of implantation is not appropriate. So the role of progesterone in endometrial receptivity in the current diagnostic tool we have is the ERA test, but with time you'll have much more better endometrial receptivity assay tests which reflect both the progesterone and the receptivity of the endometrium to make a much more holistic view. Next slide. So when it comes to progesterone from a patient perspective, the female age, the progesterone elevation duration, the development stage of the embryo, whether we are transferring the day 3 embryo or the day 5 embryo, and the number of top quality embryos that are available all reflect the implantation rate in a progesterone elevation, but not a single isolated value. Next slide. In the stimulation protocol, as I mentioned, if you are giving a large amount of FSH, not HMG, or if you're giving only an FSH, some of them will have a premature progesterone elevation. And between agonistic and antagonistic cycle, they found that a progesterone elevation is slightly higher in the antagonistic cycle compared to the agonistic cycle. Similarly, a progesterone elevation, premature progesterone elevation, is slightly higher in poor responder and also excessive responder. And when you give LH supplementation, the premature progesterone rise is decreased, and the exact mechanism how it happens is still being evaluated. Next slide. One more important thing is you should also have a minimal amount of progesterone. If your progesterone is less than 0.5 nanograms, again your pregnancy rate falls down. So it's an inverted U curve. If your progesterone crosses more than 1.5 to 2 nanograms, there's a significant drop in pregnancy rate. Similarly, if your progesterone is less than 0.5 nanograms per ml, there also your pregnancy rate drops down. Here is a beautiful work which was published in the Human Reproduction in 2014, where they're showing the live birth rate in relation to the serum progesterone on the day of HCG. On the left side, you're seeing when it is 0.5, the live birth rate has dropped to 15%. When it is at 1 nanogram, you find the live birth rate at 26%. And when it crosses 1.5 nanograms per ml, again it has dropped to 16 nanograms per ml. In other words, it's saying that we should have some amount of progesterone, but not too much of progesterone. And again, it is a premature rise of progesterone, but not premature luteinization. Next slide. Then when it comes to SA, there are a lot of myths that are there. So when do we measure the progesterone? A lot of people do it on the day of HCG, but there are some groups who do it on the 3rd day, 5th day, and 7th day. Some people do it only on the 7th day and every day. And there's an interesting survey that was done by the World IVF Group, and maybe in another 2 weeks you get what is happening in different parts of the world, how they measure progesterone. Next slide. We send a blood sample for progesterone, but we don't check when the progesterone was taken and what time it reached the laboratory. That means the pre-analyticals that happen in the progesterone estimation is never analyzed. We should take precaution that our pre-analytic parts in the progesterone estimation are well maintained, and some few people suggest to do the progesterone at the same time because of variability, but not many people agree with that concept. Next slide. Progesterone can be assayed by immunoassay methods, by fluorescent method, by chemoluminescence. Next slide. And one of the popular machines that are used in a lot of laboratories is a Roche machine called Cobas, which is supposed to be quite good, but it has its own limitations, which I'll tell you in a minute. Next slide. The value of the progesterone test depends on whether the laboratory did the calibration of the assay. Second thing is, what is the temperature of the room in which the progesterone assays were done, and whether the machine temperature is at the right temperature. Are they using consistently the same reagents, or they're changing the reagents? Are they changing the specimen preparation and the processing time? And whether the methods are automated or manual, all make a huge difference in your progesterone estimation. Because we are looking at sub-nanogram levels, and unless these variabilities are taken care of, our progesterone value may not mean anything at all sometimes. Next slide. There is an interesting thing which I discussed last time was metrics for evaluation of quality, and there's a parameter called uncertainty of the lab, in which if the same sample is run 3 times in that particular lab, it should reflect how much of uncertainty or variation is there. If somebody gets reports an 8 nanogram and their uncertainty of their value of their lab is 0.3 nanograms, then your value can be 0.5 nanograms or 0.9 nanograms. So asking for uncertainty of the lab will help you to know whether you're overreacting or you're making a right decision. This is an important thing at the progesterone level. Next slide. Next slide. In a beautiful article that was published in the Fertility Sterility, they compared the mass spectroscopy assessment of the progesterone versus the direct assay of the top class chemoimmunosense and the immunosense method. And in the patient one, you see the orange one is the mass spectroscopy values, and they are at less than 1 nanogram. Whereas in the direct assays, you're finding the values between 2 to 3 nanograms. And if you get this report from a mass spectroscopy, you do a fresh embryo transfer. If you get this report from a chemoluminescence or the other methods, then you'll say freeze-all protocol. So progesterone variability is an important factor, and it should be ideally done on mass spectroscopy, which I'll explain in a minute. This is how a mass spectroscopy is done, where the molecular weight of the progesterone is estimated, whereas all other methods are indirect methods. Next slide. So the first thing is, when we're using the progesterone, we should be prepared to say that we should have a good embryologist, a good blastocyst formation, we should have a good freezing program and a foolproof identification program before we identify and plan freeze-all. The levels of progesterone elevation is, we should check the quality control of the pre-analyticals, the lab, the patient variabilities, and whether we're planning the day 3 value, day 3 embryo transfer, and the day, or the day 5, because the cutoff levels for all these are different. Next slide. This is a beautiful article which I have shown it in the slide. The precision of progesterone measurement with the use of automated immunoassay analyzers and the impact of clinical decision, where they compared the difference between the automated immunoassay method and the LCMS slide which I shown earlier, and they came to a conclusion that for COBAS, the lower limit of determination is 0.03 nanograms and the upper limit is 60 nanograms. For the bioscience, it is 0.1 nanograms to 40 nanograms. For the Beckman-Coulter, it is 0.0008 to 40. So you see here, we are measuring the progesterone for which we are making a decision at the lowest level of the sensitivity of the machine, and that is where you might make a lot of mistakes. But when these technology were developed, they were developed more for the luteal phase progesterone, either in the human industry or in the animal industry, but not for the IVF at the follicular phase. That's the reason you have the lower limits being determined at 0.2 or 0.03, but the upper limit is at 40 nanograms. Then the next thing is the benchmark to do a progesterone. If you want to do on a consistent basis of freeze-all, use a liquid mass spectroscopy, assess the values, and if it is more than 1.5, then you can consider a freeze-all protocol. Otherwise, you may not be doing the best of practices, even though what is written in the textbook, they never mention the sensitivity of the equipment, except unless you read the material methods. Can we go to the third slide? Comparison with LCMS, the role of I've skipped 2 slides and went into the comparison. Are you able to see that slide? Hello?
What we can see is, things to look for. Ask for uncertainty of the lab.
Then we should go much forwards.
Why do we have confusion about it?
We have moved much farther away. Then uncertainty. Then we should go for the LCMS method, persistent assay. That's the second slide after that, where there is an LCMS machine.
Yeah, now there was LCMS. This one. PASSE is LCMS, sir.
Yeah, persistent assay and LCMS, where you see the direct assay that is done on the immunoassay methods, where the same patient's value you got 2 nanograms to 3 nanograms. But when it was done in the mass spectroscopy, you have less than 1 nanogram for the same patient sample. This is the amount of difference you get it. Then we go to the next slide. Then we move to the three slide and go to an article called Precision of Progesterone Measurement with the Use of Automated Immunoassay. Move to 3 slides further. Yeah, this slide. Here what happens is, here you're seeing the same article which I showed in the precision of the progesterone elevation in relation to mass spectroscopy. This is a beautiful article. Anybody who is doing freeze-all protocol should read this article. It's a fascinating article. Can we move to the next slide? Here it is a comparison between different instruments, wherein when you look at the lower end of the sensitivity, it is 0.2 and the upper end is 40 nanograms. That means these machines were designed for luteal phase progesterone and early pregnancy progesterone. They were never designed for premature progesterone elevation at the 1 nanogram or sub 1 nanogram level. Can we move to the next slide? So the golden standard is the mass spectroscopy. Can we go to the next slide? This is how a mass spectroscopy equipment looks like, where the molecular weight is identified after breaking the molecule. So all other methods are indirect methods. And in that method, each molecule is baked into its elemental thing, and then the molecular weight is calculated. And that's how the progesterone is estimated in a perfect way. Can we go to the next slide? This is how a report that comes from the mass spectroscopy looks like. And this is the peak you see at the top. Those are the peaks of the molecular weights they calculate. The machine calculates after calibration. Can we go to the next slide? This is an important slide where you see the linearity of the mass spectroscopy versus immunoassays. At sub 1 nanogram, the linearities are different. Whereas when it comes to 4 nanograms, all of them are linear to the mass spectroscopy. So the sensitivity of the immunoassay methods at 1.5 and below is not perfect, as shown in the article. This image is from the same fertility sterility article which I was discussing. Next slide. So it depends on the day of the assay, the type of the platform, and the potential for diagnostic errors. In these situations, are we making the right decision? Because we have the science of understanding, but the tools and the laboratory support that is giving in are not accurate as we think. So we should redefine about the tools we use it. That will help us to understand and use it better. Next slide. And in the article which I have shown, they concluded in a freeze-all transfer, the net increase in outcome is 2%, and if it's not properly executed, it will impact the outcome by 10%. Next slide. So I would say that as follows, the summary of this article is, one thing is, we should make a difference between premature progesterone rise and premature luteinization. Second thing is, we should look at what are the drugs we are giving to the patient, how many oocytes we have obtained, and what are the protocols we have used. The third thing is the laboratory uncertainty value accurate, and are we doing those parameters very efficiently? These are the parameters we should look at before we implement the progesterone estimation in the follicular phase. Now I will be willing to answer the questions.
Sir, it was a very difficult talk. I mean, it was very. I mean, for me, it took a lot of. I had to focus a lot because it was out of of our imagination, that the things that you had picked up. And this concept, I would like you to make us understand again the difference between premature luteinization and the premature rise in progesterone. What does it matter? If there is a premature luteinization, how does it affect? And a rise, how does it affect? I mean, why should we take it differently?
In a premature luteinization, the granular theca cells are going to be changed, and there's a progressive increase in the LH and a progressive rise of progesterone. That means the two-cell gonadotrophin concept is shifting into the luteal phase. And it's a progressive event, and you will see changes in the endometrium also. Whereas in a premature progesterone rise, it's a subtle rise, but not related to the luteinization of the ovary. And it has nothing to do with the elevation of the LH. Everything looks normal, but your progesterone is elevated, but it's never elevated beyond 2 nanograms. Whereas in a premature luteinization, it's a progressive rise of your progesterone.
That means we have to check LH levels also with progesterone, sir.
What happens is, if you have a premature rise of progesterone and a premature luteinization, in premature luteinization, your endometrium changes.
So how do we see the changes in the endometrium, sir?
Because what happens is, as your progesterone rises beyond 2 nanograms and goes to 5 or 6, you obviously have the change in the endometrium now.
Secretory. It becomes secretory.
Yes. That is different from a premature progesterone rise. Is a subtle rise, but it does not affect the endometrium.
So that means it is not harmful?
It is harmful.
It is a marker which we are not identified as significance. It's a marker
Really, sir,
where
unexplained, not getting good embryos. Sometimes we are getting many.
No. What happens is, in a premature progesterone rise, you get it in younger patients and older patients. You get it when there are too many oocytes and too few oocytes. You get it when you have given too much of FSH without LH component or only the FSH. Then you're getting this progesterone when there's an adrenal component. So it's not a single entity as we think. But the scientific community has never given us a clarity saying that premature progesterone rise is different from premature luteinization. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in a subtle premature rise of progesterone, it is not progressive. The basal progesterone in that patient on the day of HCG is not a progressive rise. It's slightly elevated compared to the other peers of that IVF patient.
Okay.
Added to that, we have the laboratory tests where the lower end of the sensitivity of the machines are 0.5 nanograms to 0.1 nanograms, and we are trying to test a value between 0.5 to 1.5. You are taking a test which is at the lowest sensitivity, whereas in a mass spectroscopy, it's at the picogram level, the sensitivity. And to give an example, 1 nanogram is a grain of sand. And that you're measuring in 1 ml of blood. And there the sensitivity of the equipment we are using is at the lowest point of that sensitivity.
So then, is there any role of measuring it? Because it is so, I mean, the how we measure it also matters. And there is so much variation in the measurement in the lab values as such. So would it be sensible to measure it in each case?
The answer is you're using the wrong technology to measure it. Because when you go and look at the LCMS study in that Precision of Immunoassays article, they clearly describe that if you are going to use progesterone estimation in the follicular phase, use mass spectroscopy. Similarly, when you come to testosterone, the current guidelines of the SRA guidelines, when you're measuring free testosterone, is to use mass spectroscopy. So the world has not taught that we are using an inappropriate tool. I don't say a wrong tool, but not the best tool. And on top of it, we have too many variables. The variability of the lab, the variability of the patient, and the variability of the transfer we are doing. And for a long time, I didn't understand the difference between premature progesterone rise and luteinization. I thought both were same.
Yeah.
Till 5 years back, I thought both were same. That's an honest confession.
Sir, what is the message to all of us as far as this particular investigation need to be concerned? Because I found, the results which you are showing from 33%, if it is rise, it can come down to 22%. So आप ये मुझे बताइए कि do we need to do these particular things or do we not bother about them?
If you want to do it by mass spectroscopy.
Then we don't have any control, sir. For the lab, we don't have any control.
Because what happens is your sensitivity of your machine in your lab is at 1 nanogram.
Then
Or 0.1 nanogram.
I took your point at all, everything. We are not doing it ourselves. We are sending it to the big labs. Big lab also, they collect it here and they do it in Janakpur, about 30 kilometers from here. What they are doing it, we have no control over it.
I don't do progesterone estimation in the follicular phase at all.
I think that's a great message. This is what the message we want. And as far as I'm concerned, my colleague Brigadier Sharma is here. I have not done a single patient. I have not done a progesterone estimation.
The
My
second
colleague
thing
Dr.
is-
Jyoti Agarwal tells me at times, let's start doing it, but we have not done it. I don't
The
want to
second-
make IVF complicated.
I don't do progesterone estimation in the follicular phase. In the IVF, the only time I do a progesterone estimation is in a frozen transfer cycle when I'm giving a progesterone supplementation. On day 4, I estimate the progesterone using quinone gel. And if it is more than 9 nanograms, I do the transfer on the next day.
Chal bhai.
And I have an in-house mass spectroscopy. But what happens is the message outside, you have too many variables of that information. And are you measuring the right tool? Oh, we thought that's a tool and we are using it.
So that I think we can take a question and answer in the next session because it is getting too late for this time.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you
And I
very
very
much.
apologize for my slides because I could not see it.
No, it's
And
Dr. Seema, can we take Brigadier Sharma sir's opinion about progesterone? His one word liner.
yes, one more
What-
line.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Hello, I totally agree with Dr. Raju, because if you do progesterone tests at different time of the day also, you will find the different reports, even with the same machine. So really doing progesterone, in the follicular phase is not important, but definitely doing ultrasound and see the changes in the ultrasound. If you find secretory changes, that gives you an evidence that luteinization is taking place. And that is the one, where you may do the progesterone and also do freezol in that particular case. But if you find that by ultrasonography you do not find any luteinization change, then the progesterone test during the follicular phase may not be much beneficial since we have no control over, which machine and how we are doing it.
Excellent. Sir.
Thank you, sir.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Apologies.
Ramanujan sir.
Next time
Thank you
I'll
very
like
much,
to-
sir. And really,
Next time I would-
it has
Next
really
time-
added to our knowledge.
So
Definitely.
this was a PG class actually.
Definitely.
Yes, sir.
I would say PG is a
I
PhD
was-
class.
PhD, I
class
was
is
about to say this only. It was a PhD lecture, I think.
No, actually what happens is,
Levels.
what happens is we never knew it has so many ramifications.
So it's totally
And,
subject.
And second thing is the beautiful statement the author has given in that article is by doing it properly you're increasing by 2%, by doing it improperly you're decreasing by 10%.
You better not to do it.
Better not. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you all the chairpersons, experts, and Sharma sir, Shada ma'am, and all my colleagues. Thank you very much for staying so long, and we'll definitely look forward for the next 20th. That
Yes,
is
ma'am.
20th of October.
And next time I would prefer the Zoom, madam. I can have my own subscription. It's
sir.
comfortable.
We'll take your this Zoom.
Okay, sir. Yeah, we'll take care, sir, next time.
Because what happens, I'm used to Zoom comfortable and
Yes. Okay, sir.
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you.
Good day. Good day. Thank you, everyone.